So, Brett, when you could just come into house, what are the most like common areas or that possibly have like mold and infections, or how do you kind of walk through the house? What's the system?
I generally just start in one area and work through the house from one end to the other. Usually as I go though, I'm taking humidity readings as well. So before we do any testing, we make the occupant shut the house for a minimum of 24 hours to figure out what's happening within their house humidity wise as well. So we'd take humidities in every room of the house to see if there's any differences in humidity in the house, to see if there's a potential area for water ingress or higher levels of humidity in a certain room, which will give me more idea of what's happening in the house, to see if there's any good passive ventilation, which in new houses like this there tends to be not very good passive ventilation because they're so airtight now. And then from there I would start looking at, I look for dust too, like as I'm going through I've got this spotlight, this very bright spotlight, which I tend to look at say under furniture, and I look into areas that might carry high levels of dust, because what we're kind of unaware of is that mold and dust go together, you know, and then if we have some sort of high humidity in the air within the home, then that's a perfect environment for the mold to grow. So areas that look like dust sometimes can actually have quite high levels of mold in it once you test them.
But usually the bigger problem are the moist areas and lack of circulation in the closing. Like for example, you would prefer to open the windows in the house, not keep it enclosed and kind of not circulating.
Yeah.
Or if it's also wet, then it's even worse, and that's how I kind of get it.
Yeah. And then so from there I usually go in and start either testing rooms depending on what I find, or for example this air conditioning unit, which we could have a look at now. This is a pretty prime example of what. Can you see that in there? So you can see, if you can see on the camera, there's you can see potential mold in that unit.
So that's not only dust. There's like black patches in the humidifier.
Yep. So this is in the heat pump. That we call them heat pumps in New Zealand, or air conditioning units. And you can see it if you look right up in there. There's a barrel fan, and that spins the air around, and you can see it even furry stuff growing on there. So we'd call that potential mold until we actually test it, and then we can confirm that it is mold. So from there, what I do is I get this this swab, and I get it right up into the machine, usually in the center of it, and I usually hold it with another piece of wood. But this is generally what I do, and I swab this. This will give you an idea of how dirty it is too. And usually just swab one of the fins in the barrel fan. So you can see how much debris is on that. And then from there it gets put back in there and sent to the lab, and they work out what sort of, they'll tell me what genre of mold, what type of mold it is,
and the quantity of
spores, yes.
Does it show the spores or the mycotoxin levels?
It just shows the spore levels, So mycotoxins is a whole lot of another testing regime, which is generally not done. That's more comes under VOC testing. Yeah.
And also mycotoxins can be tested in the body, in the human body as well.
Yes, correct. Yes, it's a urine sample. Which is quite handy actually, because when I tested my house, my heat pump was actually really high in Aspergillus penicillium, which happens to be the specific mold that creates the ochratoxin that I'm allergic to. So what I realized from there was I stopped using my air conditioning unit and changed my form of heating more to radiant, just because I knew that was a potential pathway for me.
And stuff like that, if it let's say continuously keeps pushing warm air to all the house, to the kitchen and everything, it's constantly also pushing the spores through wherever people spend most time, in this case the kitchen kind of area. So that's a continuous exposure to the toxins.
Correct. And while we're at it, I'll also talk about another exposure linked to air conditioning units, and that's cars that people aren't aware about. Like, they might get their house really good and then they hop in their car. And I mean, COVID was a really good thing for me because I'd been driving my vehicle all the time, and then we couldn't drive for such a long period of time. As soon as I got back in the car, I was getting these massive headaches again. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And then when I actually looked at my air conditioning unit, I had a look in there and I pulled it all apart, and it was just full of mold. So
Wow.
even if you get your house right, that's another area to be looking at health-wise, is your vehicle or somewhere else you spend a lot of time.
Right, so now let's go to different room.
Different room.
Yeah.
Changes.
Yep.